And let's get into this first story because I had seen a lot of this talk because my initial thought when I saw Catherine's cancer video is wonderful, fantastic, amazing. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. But other royal commentators slash reporters, especially those within the royal Rota, seem to have a different perspective. And I thought that was sort of odd, but I think I know what's happening. But let's get some of what they've said because it's always important to react to what is being said rather than just kind of condensing. So let's look first here at what Richard Eden said. And yes, I know Richard Eden got a lot of flack this week for what he talked about, but let's get to some of his comments and some of the comments as he's apparently allegedly gotten from sources. So the first we have here, this is from the Daily Mail, obviously, and this is according to some of the monarch's friends who are critical of the video. They said there's no coincidence that the Middletons appear in it and not the king and queen. I can assure you that Charles and Camilla will not be filmed kissing each other on a beach as Catherine and William were until hell freezes over. It's distinctly unregal. Well, number one, Charles and Camilla are in their 70s now. I would think it would be really hard for them to roll around on a beach. So that comparison doesn't even make any sense, which I found so incredibly odd. But I think the question here that I'm seeing a lot is, what is quote unquote regal anymore? I think that's a big question. So it goes on to say, this is a different source who says, all that lying around, hugging and kissing, they're not sloppy teenagers that felt manipulative, the sort of thing that Meghan Markle would make. All of that, the time and effort and expense into making the video could have been much better spent elsewhere. Why not visit other women being treated for cancer? That's what Diana would have done. And obviously, I have issues with a lot of that as well. Number one, and I think people lose sight of this, obviously, because Meghan Markle had this sort of Hollywood bent to her when she came into the royal family, and she still sort of has this Hollywood bent, is that it's not bad for the royals to decide, hey, you know what? Let's change things up. Because I think what people forget is Harry and Meghan left in January 2020 and the Queen was still reigning, but then COVID happened. Everything went on lockdown. And so we had this kind of long period of time where nobody was doing all that much. And then King Philip died in 2021. And then Her Majesty really removed herself and pulled back from a lot of engagements by 2021, 2022. I mean, it was already happening pre-COVID, but it really became apparent after COVID. And so then she passed away in 2022. Then we have Charles. And you have this initial reaction in the royals is to continue on with her traditions and how she liked to do things. But obviously, times are changing. Times are always changing. And so I think it's really important here to recognize that because Her Majesty is no longer queen, obviously there's a new generation and they're going to modernize in the way they see fit, which might not be what some people want. There was an article I read from the Telegraph talking about how sometimes people outside the palace are more interested in the protocols than those inside the palace. And I think that's somewhat true. And then you also have the case of, yes, even though Meghan left, I don't think she had an influence on maybe this turn towards what you could consider a more Hollywood style, but I wouldn't. But it was something that was naturally going to occur because Her Majesty isn't here anymore. And so the royal family is trying to figure out what life is like beyond Her Majesty. What do things look like? How are we going to look as royals? That's a very big question because I think people forget that times change. And because times change, we have, you could argue, sort of a different outlook on things. Richard said as well that he's worried about various things and he's thinking, oh, it's too slick and whatever. And it's like, well, if it's good, I don't understand quite why that's an issue. Why is it an issue that the video is good? I don't quite understand that because it should be good, shouldn't it? And I think it was. I think it was absolutely amazing. So I really like this bit of just kind of addressing some of what they're saying because it is important. And let's go ahead and listen to the Telegraph editor as well, because he also had some thoughts.
If it's about cancer, why is she not using that platform to thank the people who've treated her by showing them? And
so number one, the idea that she needs to show the people who treated her, well, why? Because that might impact patient confidentiality? Maybe she doesn't want to show them. Maybe they don't even want to be on the TV. Why does she have to show her medical team? That's a little ridiculous. Like, thank them, yes, but I'm sure she thanked them privately. She doesn't need to parade them around for people to get that message.
And B, show people that, look, I've been through what you may be going through. Here's me, whether it's just her taking a tablet or.
Why do we need to see her getting chemo? I don't quite understand this emphasis of why we need to actually see her in her most vulnerable moments. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So I think that's completely and utterly wrong there.
Whatever, just something that shows you that she has been through this, rather than here's me walking through a wheat field looking like the perfect family.
And so why is it a problem that she's walking through a wheat field? And they don't have the perfect family. I think Catherine and William would be the first to admit that. But why is it an issue for her to show herself unburdened by this cancer, really, in some ways, and looking to the future and looking to hope? So why is all this going on? I think it's kind of interesting, and there's a couple of different routes you could say. But I think what's going on is, since the beginning of this year, especially with the whole fiasco over the alleged Photoshop picture. I mean, it was Photoshopped, but the reaction by the media, which was just completely and totally ridiculous, is that the mainstream, particularly the Royal Rota, the people who are allowed to follow and report on the royals where other people are not, are figuring out that the Royal Palace has maybe sort of caught on to the fact that they can directly talk to the public without going through the Royal Rota. Because before social media, everything about the royals really did come through the Royal Rota. They had an immense amount of control over the royal narrative and message. But since social media, royals are able to communicate directly through to the people. And I think the royals should take advantage of this more. That doesn't mean you exclude the media from your events. But I think what that does mean is that you also get to control your narrative. And that's what Catherine and William are exercising right now. They're controlling their narrative. They're not letting the press take the pictures of their kids for their birthdays. They're not letting the press get the pictures exclusively, like Getty Images. Even though Getty Images can't sell them, they're now putting them on their social media. And then Getty Images is picking them up and putting them on their website. So they've kind of, in some ways, cut out the middleman, which is the Royal Rota. And I think in some ways that is what they're reacting to. They're being cut out of things all of a sudden, and they're not taking it too well in some instances. Now, that's just my theory. I don't know that for sure. But I would say, even overall, is that when it comes to the media and everything, the reason this channel exists is because of social media. If this was like 10 years ago, this channel probably wouldn't exist or wouldn't do very well, in part because you wouldn't really get any access. Now, things again are changing, are moving, and people are getting a greater insight. And all of a sudden, the Royal Rota is sort of this massive, very, you could say, a clique within journalism, just doesn't really, again, is sort of being slowly dismantled. And I think that's great. I think decentralization of media is happening all over the place, because when one person or one group controls the information, that's not always a good thing. So I think a couple of things could work together. So you have the Royal Rota, which still exists and does its thing. You have more independent outlets like myself and others that maybe can cover royal engagements from time to time. And then you also have the royals themselves, who might be able and should be able to sort of control the narrative the way they see fit. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think that is what they should be striving towards. That way you get a couple of different ways to get out the same information. Sometimes it'll be positive. Sometimes it might be negative. It might be mixed. All these things will come together. And I think it'll be a greater reflection for royals and good for them. I always say the Spanish are great because they have their own YouTube channel. So they have a videographer who films every single royal engagement and posts it on their YouTube channel. They're very active in posting pictures of their various engagements and those sorts of things. And it's not something where it's too produced. It's very like, here's news. We were here. Here's pictures of us here. Next thing. And the videos are also very simple as well. I feel like more royals should adopt kind of that lifestyle, or I don't know if that's lifestyle, but that approach to media. And I think that's very much led probably by Queen Letizia herself, who is a former news anchor, that it is very, very much there where you can have this greater control. And again, I think all royal families should adopt that. You put out your videos, the media puts out their videos, other outlets put out their videos, and it all works together. And I think it will all work together in a positive way. But that's just my thoughts on that situation. I know a lot of people have been watching this and just sort of confused. I remain confused as well. But that's the one thing I think is that it really seems like the royal family is maybe slowly sort of putting some of the royal rota to the side and going, you know what? We have this direct route to the people. We are going to use it. I still think the video is powerful. I think it's great. I still don't quite understand the criticism of it, except for again, that hey, they couldn't make it and that's their issue, rather than Catherine and William being able to control the whole thing, which they should. Again, going through cancer is a very, very vulnerable time. And you don't really need the media has this thing sometimes where they're looking for the story and they want anything they can exploit. And this is not a time for exploitation or anything like that. And I think the media themselves has developed a distrust among the royals. So it started obviously with Catherine and William when they were doing their tour of the Caribbean. The media, some outlets, led by some people like Omid Scobie and stuff, turned what was a natural thing. People, there was a fence around the soccer stadium, and Catherine and William were graciously shaking hands with people through the fence. All of a sudden, this came a thing of racism. And so Catherine and William are kind of they're sort of confused. And it kind of spirals out into the rest of the trip. Then the Jamaican prime minister gives them a hard time. And so it becomes this tour that's supposed to be really gracious and amazing into something that's really negative. And then you have obviously Catherine's cancer diagnosis as well, and how the media treated especially the photoshopped image. Yes, the photoshopping was poor, but if Catherine wasn't feeling well at the time and just thought it was good enough, needed to get something out, obviously those sorts of things can happen. But the way the media twisted it into something just absolutely abhorrent was crazy. And then you had them also feeding the hashtag where is Kate phenomenon. Like the media was covering stories about it. I'm like, why are you covering stories? This is a non-story. She told us she would be out until X time, and it's not X time yet. So why are you freaking out? You all know it was a public statement. But I think the media has really grown, and the palace has a distrust with them. I think especially Catherine and William. Catherine's and William's trust in the media is at an all-time low. And I think this is reflected in the video. And obviously there's a lot of things going on. And there's, like somebody said, I saw a reel here. Laura is talking about the anti-monarchy crowd, which is gaining steam as well. And so it's just kind of all these things coming together, and you have a crisis within the family, and Catherine and William are like, no, we're going to control our own narrative. So I would encourage them. I would say stick on that fact. Don't close out the media like Harry and Meghan did on Columbia. That's not the way to do it either. But again, I think they can have their own voice. They should have their own voice. And I think at the end of the day, they will feel better when they have just maybe a smidge more control over certain things, rather than just leaving it all at the feet of the media. Because when you do that, things can go awry. So those are my thoughts on that. Hope you guys might have found that a little interesting, or a little giving you greater insight into something that I know we are all a little bit confused over. Yes, it is a crazy time.